What happens when the truth behind a child's striking blue eyes arrives on your doorstep, delivered not by fate, but by a courier carrying legal documents? How far can someone twist loyalty and trust before it snaps back, not in a flood of consequences? This is the story of how my biggest secret unraveled the life I thought I controlled. The Sunday dinner table gleamed under our dining room chandelier, every piece of silverware perfectly aligned. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing Jonas's favorite pot roast, arranging fresh flowers from our garden, and making sure 7-year-old Miriam looked picture-perfect in her new dress. Everything had to be flawless when Jonas's parents visited. "Eliora, this roast is delicious as always," Arthur said, cutting another piece with surgical precision. My father-in-law always knew exactly what to say to keep the peace. "Thank you, Arthur. I tried that new seasoning blend from the farmer's market." I smiled warmly, playing the devoted wife and daughter-in-law to perfection. This was my stage, and I knew every line by heart. Jonas sat quietly at the head of the table, methodically eating his dinner while scrolling through emails on his phone. His silence had become our new normal over the past few months. Ever since the IVF treatments began, he'd grown distant and suspicious, always watching me with those calculating brown eyes. "Jonas, put that phone away," Sylvia snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We're having a family dinner." My mother-in-law had never particularly liked me, but lately her disapproval had evolved into something closer to open hostility. She watched me constantly, as if waiting for me to slip up and reveal some terrible secret. "Sorry, Mum. Just checking on a client portfolio." Jonas pocketed his phone, but kept his eyes fixed on his plate. "Daddy works too much," Miriam chimed in, twirling her fork through her mashed potatoes. "Mummy says you're a workaholic." I felt heat creep up my neck. "I never said that, sweetheart. I said Daddy works very hard to take care of our family." Jonas finally looked up, his gaze meeting mine across the table. "Did you? Because I distinctly remember you using the word workaholic during our conversation yesterday." "You're being paranoid again," I said quickly, forcing a laugh. "You know how children mix up words." Sylvia set down her fork with a deliberate clink. "Paranoid? That's an interesting choice of words, Eliora." "What's that supposed to mean?" I kept my voice light, but inside I felt the familiar surge of irritation. Sylvia always found ways to undermine me, to make me look bad in front of Jonas. "It means," Sylvia continued, "that calling your husband paranoid for paying attention to his own family seems rather harsh." Arthur cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should talk about something more pleasant. Miriam, how's school going?" "Really good. Mrs. Henderson says I'm the smartest in my reading group." Miriam beamed, her bright blue eyes sparkling with pride. Those eyes. Every time I looked at them, my stomach clenched with a mixture of guilt and terror. They were so vivid, so distinctly blue, nothing like Jonas's warm brown eyes, or my own hazel ones. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, reaching over to smooth her dark hair. "You get your intelligence from your father." "But I get my pretty eyes from somewhere else, right?" Miriam asked innocently. "Tommy's mum said I have the bluest eyes she's ever seen. She asked if they run in our family." The dining room fell silent except for the tick of our grandfather clock. I felt every pair of adult eyes turn toward me, waiting for my response. "Genetics are funny that way," I said with practiced casualness. "Sometimes traits skip generations. Maybe you got them from a great-grandparent." Jonas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Both my grandparents had brown eyes, and all of Eliora's family has either hazel or green eyes. "Well, you never know," I said quickly. "There could be some distant relative we don't know about. Blue eyes can come from anywhere." Sylvia leaned back in her chair, studying me with the intensity of a prosecutor cross-examining a witness. "Can they? I thought eye-color genetics were fairly straightforward." "You're not a geneticist, Sylvia," I snapped, my composure finally cracking. "None of us are. Can we please just enjoy our family dinner without turning it into a biology lesson?" "Of course, dear," Arthur said diplomatically. Miriam is beautiful regardless of where her eyes came from. But the damage was done. The rest of dinner passed in strained politeness, with Sylvia shooting me suspicious glances and Jonas retreating further into his shell. When they finally left, I felt exhausted from maintaining my performance. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Later that evening, as I tucked Miriam into bed, she looked up at me with those devastating blue eyes. "Mummy, why did Grandma Sylvia look angry when I talked about my eyes?" "She wasn't angry, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just have serious faces when they're thinking." "But Daddy looked upset too. Are you and Daddy fighting?" My heart broke a little at the worry in her voice. "No, baby. Daddy and I just have some grown-up things to work out, but we both love you very much, okay?" She nodded and closed her eyes, but I could see the tension in her small shoulders. Children always know when something's wrong, even when adults try to hide it. Downstairs, Jonas was loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. He didn't look up when I entered the kitchen. "Your mother was particularly hostile tonight," I said, attempting to sound casual. "Was she? I thought she was just making conversation." "Making conversation?" She was practically interrogating me about Miriam's eye color. Jonas straightened up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "And you found that threatening because—" "I didn't find it threatening. I found it rude and inappropriate." "Inappropriate to notice that our daughter's eyes don't match either of her parents?" There it was. The question that had been hanging between us for months. I could see the suspicion in his face, the growing certainty that something wasn't right. "Jonas, you're being ridiculous. Plenty of children look different from their parents. Are you seriously suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," he interrupted. "I'm observing. And what I observe is that every time someone comments on Miriam's appearance, you get defensive and start attacking me or my family." "I don't attack anyone. I just don't appreciate being made to feel like I'm under investigation in my own home." Jonas closed the dishwasher and turned to face me fully. "Eliora, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My pulse quickened. "What?" "During the IVF process, did anything unusual happen? Anything you haven't told me about?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. I could feel everything balanced on the edge of my answer: my marriage, my family, my carefully constructed life. "What kind of question is that?" I deflected. "Of course nothing unusual happened. We went through the same process as thousands of other couples." "That's not what I asked." "It's the answer you're getting," I said firmly. "I can't believe you're standing here questioning our daughter's paternity based on her eye color. Do you have any idea how hurtful that is?" Jonas studied my face for a long moment, and I forced myself to maintain eye contact despite the guilt churning in my stomach. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm sorry, it's just—" "Just what?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But I could see he wasn't forgetting anything. If anything, my defensive reaction had only confirmed his suspicions. As he headed upstairs to bed, I knew that Sunday dinner had marked a turning point. The perfect family facade I'd worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crack. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear Miriam's innocent voice asking about her different blue eyes, the eyes that looked exactly like Lucas Reed's. 3 months earlier, the fertility clinic had been buzzing with its usual mixture of hope and desperation. The waiting room was filled with couples clutching each other's hands, their faces showing the strain of months or years of trying to conceive. Jonas and I sat among them, but we weren't trying for our first child. We were trying for our second, after years of unexplained secondary infertility. "Mrs. Vane," a nurse called my name, and we both stood up. "Actually," I said quickly, "I need to use the restroom first. Jonas, why don't you go ahead and get started with the paperwork?" Jonas nodded and followed the nurse down the hallway. I waited exactly 60 seconds, then headed in the opposite direction toward the sample collection area. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The plan had been forming in my mind for weeks. Lucas had been more than willing to help when I'd explained the situation during one of our coffee meetings. He thought it was romantic, giving me the child Jonas couldn't. He didn't understand the deeper implications, and I hadn't bothered to explain them. Dr. Harlow's clinic was state-of-the-art, but it wasn't Fort Knox. The sample storage area was accessible through a keycard door that I'd watched the nurses use dozens of times during our previous visits. More importantly, I'd befriended Sarah, one of the lab technicians, during our months of treatment. "Oh, hi, Eliora," Sarah said when I knocked on the lab door. "Are you looking for Jonas? He's in room 3. Actually, I wanted to ask you about the timeline for today's procedure. Dr. Harlow mentioned something about optimal timing, and I'm a bit confused about the schedule." Sarah launched into a detailed explanation of the IVF process, just as I'd hoped she would. While she talked, I positioned myself near the sample storage unit, memorizing the layout and the labeling system. "Oh, that makes so much more sense," I said when she finished. "Thank you for being so patient with all my questions." "Of course, this process can be overwhelming. I'll be right back. I need to check on something in the other lab." The moment she left, I moved quickly. Lucas's sample was in a small cooler bag in my purse, properly labeled and timed according to the clinic's specifications. I found Jonas's sample in the storage unit and made the switch, placing Jonas's sample in my purse and Lucas's in its place. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. "Everything okay in here?" Dr. Harlow's voice made me jump. "Oh, yes. Sarah was just explaining the procedure timeline to me. I wanted to make sure I understood everything correctly." Dr. Harlow smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. It's important for both partners to be fully informed. Are you ready to proceed?" "Absolutely. I'm so hopeful about this cycle." If only he knew how much hope I was pinning on this particular cycle, and how much deception was involved. The procedure itself went smoothly. Jonas held my hand while Dr. Harlow performed the implantation, both of us believing we were creating our child together. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I pushed the guilt aside. This was about giving Miriam a sibling, and giving our family the completion it needed. "How are you feeling?" Jonas asked as we drove home afterward. "Optimistic," I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. "I have a really good feeling about this cycle." "Me too. Maybe the third time really is the charm." I squeezed his hand, hating how trusting and hopeful he sounded. But I told myself this was for the best. Jonas would be a wonderful father to this child, just as he was to Miriam. The biological details were just technicalities. 2 weeks later, the pregnancy test came back positive. "I can't believe it," Jonas said, staring at the test results. "After all this time, it finally worked." "We're going to have another baby," I whispered, letting myself feel genuinely happy for the first time in months. Jonas pulled me into his arms, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the deception. This was my husband, the man I'd chosen to build a life with. He would love this child completely, regardless of genetics. But as the pregnancy progressed, small moments of doubt crept in. Jonas would sometimes study my face during ultrasound appointments, as if looking for clues about the baby's features. He asked more questions about family medical history than he had during my first pregnancy. And once, I caught him looking at old photos of us together, his expression unreadable. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Just thinking about how much our life is going to change," he said. "2 kids, bigger house, college funds to worry about." "Are you having second thoughts?" "No, of course not. I want this baby more than anything." And he did want the baby. That was the most heartbreaking part. Jonas was going to be a devoted father to a child who wasn't biologically his, and he would never know the truth. When Miriam was born with those striking blue eyes, my first emotion wasn't guilt, it was terror. Blue eyes weren't uncommon, but these were distinctly Lucas's eyes, right down to the unusual shade and the way they tilted slightly at the corners. "She's beautiful," Jonas whispered, cradling her in the hospital room. Look at those incredible eyes. Baby's eyes change color, I said quickly. They might turn brown like yours. But they never did. If anything, they became more vivid as Miriam grew older, and with each passing year, the resemblance to Lucas became more pronounced. I thought I could manage the secret indefinitely. I thought Jonas would never question it seriously, and that even if he did, there would be no way to prove anything. I underestimated how observant he was, and how much a father notices about his child. The first real scare came when Miriam was 3, and we ran into Lucas at a coffee shop. I hadn't seen him in months, and I'd forgotten how strong the resemblance was until they were in the same room. "Wow," Lucas said, staring at Miriam with obvious recognition. She has beautiful eyes," I interrupted quickly. "Everyone always comments on them." Jonas was watching the interaction carefully, and I could see him processing Lucas's near slip. That night, he asked me about our history. "How well did you know that guy from the coffee shop?" "Lucas, we dated briefly before I met you. Why?" "He seemed very interested in Miriam." "People are always interested in cute kids. You're reading too much into it." But Jonas wasn't reading too much into anything. He was reading exactly the right amount, and I could see him filing away every suspicious interaction, every defensive response, every moment when my story didn't quite add up. Now, 3 years later, the truth was closing in on me from all sides. Jonas's suspicions were growing stronger, Sylvia was asking pointed questions, and Miriam herself was starting to notice that she looked different from both her parents. The perfect crime I'd thought I'd committed was unraveling, one blue-eyed glance at a time. The Meridian restaurant buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes from mixing alcohol, office politics, and carefully maintained social facades. My company's annual dinner was always held here, and I'd spent weeks planning my outfit and preparing talking points that would showcase my perfect family life. "Eliora, you look stunning." Jennifer from accounting air-kissed me as we entered the restaurant's private dining room. "And this must be the famous Jonas and Miriam we hear so much about." Jonas managed a polite smile, but I could feel his discomfort radiating through his handshake. He'd never been comfortable at these work events, preferring quiet evenings at home to networking and small talk. "Thank you for including my family," he said stiffly. "Eliora speaks very highly of everyone here." "We're so excited to finally meet you both," said Rebecca, my supervisor. She crouched down to Miriam's level. "And look at you, beautiful. Those eyes are absolutely stunning. You must get them from—" She paused, glancing between Jonas and me with obvious confusion. "Genetics are so interesting, aren't they?" I jumped in smoothly. You never know which traits will show up. But Rebecca's confusion had been noticed by others. I watched as my colleagues began discreetly comparing Miriam's features to Jonas's and mine, their expressions growing more puzzled by the minute. "She definitely has your bone structure, Eliora," said Mark from HR, clearly trying to find some resemblance. "But those eyes are so unique." "They're like sapphires," added his wife. "I've never seen that particular shade of blue before." Jonas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd been fielding these comments for years, but they seemed to affect him more each time. "Should we find our table?" he suggested quietly. Dinner conversation flowed around topics of work promotions, vacation plans, and children's activities. I was in my element, charming my colleagues and painting a picture of domestic bliss. Jonas participated minimally, answering direct questions, but offering little else. "Jonas works in financial analysis," I explained when someone asked about his career. "He's very dedicated to his clients, sometimes too dedicated." I laughed as if this were an endearing quirk, rather than a growing source of tension between us. "That must be challenging for you, Eliora," said Rebecca, "balancing a demanding career with a husband who works long hours." "Oh, you know how it is. Sometimes I feel more like a single parent than a married woman." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the public airing of our private struggles. Jonas's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I wasn't aware you felt that way. I didn't mean, it's just an expression. All working parents feel overwhelmed sometimes. But the damage was done. My colleagues exchanged glances, sensing marital tension beneath my polished exterior. Well, Miriam seems like a wonderfully well-adjusted child, Jennifer said diplomatically. You're both clearly doing something right. She's the light of our lives, Jonas said, his voice warming for the first time all evening as he looked at Miriam. Everything we do is for her. The genuine love in his voice made my chest tighten with guilt. Jonas adored Miriam completely, never questioning his role as her father, despite the growing evidence that something wasn't right. After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee and dessert, several colleagues approached me privately. I hope you don't mind me asking, whispered Susan from marketing, but has anyone ever mentioned that Miriam doesn't really look like either of you? What do you mean? I kept my voice light, but my heart was racing. Just the eyes, mainly. They're so distinctive, and her facial structure is different too. She's beautiful, of course, but what? Nothing, I'm sure it's nothing. Kids just surprise you sometimes with how they turn out. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. My colleagues were too polite to voice their suspicions directly, but I could see the questions in their eyes. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt like I'd been through an interrogation. That was fun, I said brightly as we drove home, trying to salvage the evening. Was it? Jonas's voice was flat. Because it seemed like you spent most of the night complaining about me to your co-workers. I wasn't complaining, I was just making conversation. You called yourself a single parent, Eliora, in front of people I barely know. It was a joke. Everyone says things like that. Do they? Because it felt like you were painting me as an absent father and neglectful husband. I glanced back at Miriam, who was pretending to sleep in her car seat but clearly listening to every word. Can we discuss this later? I said quietly. Sure, we can add it to the list of things we need to discuss later. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but I could feel Jonas's anger simmering beside me. At home, after we'd put Miriam to bed, he confronted me directly. What's happening to us, Eliora? What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. The distance, the criticism, the way you talk about our marriage like it's a burden. And tonight... Tonight what? Tonight I watched a room full of strangers notice that our daughter doesn't look like either of us. And instead of addressing their obvious questions, you deflected and changed the subject. What was I supposed to say? Yes, you're right, she doesn't look like us. That would have been a lovely conversation. You could have said something normal, about family resemblances or genetic variations. Instead, you acted like someone with something to hide. The accusation hung between us like a live wire. I don't have anything to hide, Jonas. I'm sorry if my social skills don't meet your standards. This isn't about social skills. This is about the fact that you've been acting guilty and defensive for months, and I can't figure out why. Maybe because you've been treating me like a suspect in some crime I didn't commit. Jonas stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his next words carefully. Show me your phone, he said finally. What? Your phone. Show it to me right now. Absolutely not. I'm not going to be subjected to some paranoid investigation because you're feeling insecure. Insecure about what, Eliora? What exactly would I find on your phone that would make me feel insecure? The question was a trap, and we both knew it. If I had nothing to hide, why wouldn't I show him my phone? But if I did show him my phone, he'd find the text conversations with Lucas, the deleted photos I'd forgotten about, the evidence of a relationship I'd claimed was ancient history. This is ridiculous, I said instead. I'm going to bed. But as I headed upstairs, I heard Jonas moving around in the kitchen. When I came back down for a glass of water an hour later, I found him sitting at his laptop, typing intensively. What are you working on? I asked casually. He closed the laptop immediately. Just some research. Research on what? Nothing that concerns you. The coldness in his voice sent a chill down my spine. Jonas was many things. Quiet, methodical, sometimes overly serious, but he was never cold, not with me. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe beside me and wondering what kind of research he was conducting. I had a terrible feeling that my carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the darkness, I could hear Miriam coughing softly in her room, and I thought about those beautiful blue eyes that had started all of this. Eyes that looked nothing like Jonas's, nothing like mine, and everything like the man I'd been secretly meeting for coffee while planning the deception that was now threatening to destroy everything. The call came during my lunch break on a Tuesday afternoon. Miriam's teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had a warm voice, but there was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. "Mrs. Vane, I hope I'm not interrupting your workday. I wanted to talk to you about something that came up during our family heritage project." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Oh, everything's fine. It's just that Miriam has been asking some questions about her family tree, specifically about physical traits and where they come from. She's very curious about her eye color." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of questions?" "Well, she mentioned that her eyes are different from both her parents, and she wanted to know if that was normal." I assured her that genetics can be surprising, but she seemed quite concerned about it. "I thought you might want to have a conversation with her at home." "Thank you for letting me know. I'll talk to her tonight." "There's one more thing. We have a few other parents who are geneticists or doctors, and one of them overheard Miriam talking about her eyes. She mentioned, and please don't take this the wrong way, that the combination of brown-eyed and hazel-eyed parents producing such vivid blue eyes is quite rare." My mouth went dry. "Rare, but not impossible, right?" "Of course not impossible, just uncommon enough that it caught her attention. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." But I could hear the curiosity in Mrs. Henderson's voice, the same curiosity I'd been seeing in people's faces for years. That evening, I tried to act normal as we went through our usual dinner routine. Jonas was quiet, as he'd been for weeks, methodically eating his pasta while scrolling through emails on his tablet. "How was school today, sweetheart?" I asked Miriam. "Good. We worked on our family trees. Mrs. Henderson said I should ask you about great-grandparents and stuff." Jonas looked up from his tablet. "What kind of information do you need?" "Just about what people looked like and where they came from. But mostly I want to know about eyes." "Eyes?" "Yeah. Tommy's dad has blue eyes, and his mom has blue eyes, so Tommy has blue eyes. And Sarah's parents both have brown eyes, so she has brown eyes. But I have blue eyes, and neither of you do." The dining room fell silent, except for the hum of our refrigerator. Jonas set down his fork and gave Miriam his full attention. "What did Mrs. Henderson tell you about that?" he asked gently. "She said genetics are complicated, and sometimes kids look different from their parents. But Dr. Martinez, that's Amy's mom, she said it was really unusual." Jonas's eyes flicked to mine across the table. "Dr. Martinez said that?" "Uh-huh. She said brown and hazel eyes usually make brown eyes, not blue eyes. She asked if maybe there was a mistake about what color your eyes are." "A mistake?" Jonas's voice was carefully controlled. I told her no, that Daddy definitely has brown eyes and Mommy has hazel eyes, so she said maybe there's something else going on. "Something else like what?" I managed to ask. "I don't know, she didn't say, but she looked really surprised." After dinner, while Miriam was doing homework, Jonas cornered me in the kitchen. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that our 7-year-old daughter is being questioned about her paternity by other parents at her school. That's not what happened. Dr. Martinez was just making conversation." "Was she?" "Because it sounds like she was pointing out a genetic impossibility to a child." "It's not impossible, Jonas. Unusual, maybe, but not impossible." Jonas pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. "I've been doing research. The chances of 2 parents with brown and hazel eyes producing a child with vivid blue eyes is less than 1%, and that's assuming there are blue-eyed relatives in the recent family history." "So it's possible." Eliora, Neither of our families has blue eyes going back 3 generations. I've checked. The certainty in his voice terrified me. You've checked? I called my parents, I called your sister. I even looked up your grandmother's old photos. No blue eyes anywhere. Maybe there's someone we don't know about. Maybe what? Maybe there's some mysterious blue-eyed ancestor we've never heard of. Or maybe there's a simpler explanation. I could see where this conversation was heading, and I felt panic rising in my chest. What are you suggesting, Jonas? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking for the truth. The truth about what? About whether Miriam is my biological daughter. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I felt my carefully constructed world tilting off its axis. How can you ask me that? How can you look at that beautiful little girl and question whether she's yours? Because I love her, and I love you, and I need to know what's real and what isn't. She's your daughter in every way that matters. That's not an answer, Eliora. It's the only answer you're getting. Jonas stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing my non-denial. His face went through a series of emotions: hurt, anger, resignation. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Is Miriam my biological daughter? I met his gaze, summoning every ounce of conviction I could muster. Yes, I lied. Of course she is. But even as I said it, I could see that Jonas didn't believe me. The doubt that had been growing for months had crystallized into certainty, and my denial only confirmed his suspicions. Okay, he said quietly. If that's your answer, then I guess we have nothing more to discuss. He left the kitchen, and I heard him go upstairs to his office. A few minutes later, I heard the printer running, multiple pages printing out in quick succession. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dr. Martinez's comments, about Mrs. Henderson's phone call, about the look in Jonas's eyes when I'd lied to him directly. The secret I'd been carrying for 7 years was becoming impossible to contain. Around midnight, I crept downstairs to get some water and saw light coming from under Jonas's office door. I pressed my ear against it and heard him talking quietly on the phone. Yes, I understand the process, he was saying, and this can be done confidentially. No, I don't want to involve my wife at this stage. Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. My blood turned to ice. Jonas was arranging a paternity test. I stood in the hallway, listening to my husband make plans to uncover the truth I'd been hiding for 7 years. In less than 24 hours, the DNA results would prove what his eyes had been telling him for months. Miriam wasn't his biological daughter, and when that truth came out, everything else would follow. The affair with Lucas, the clinic deception, the years of lies I'd built our marriage on. I climbed back upstairs and lay in bed next to the man whose trust I'd betrayed so completely. In the morning, he would take samples of his and Miriam's DNA to a lab, and within days, our family would be destroyed. The blue eyes that I'd once thought were so beautiful now seemed like a curse, a genetic signature that would expose every lie I'd ever told. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier who required my signature and photo ID. Jonas had already left for work, and Miriam was at school, so I was alone when I signed for the thick manila package addressed to both of us. My hands shook as I read the return address: Hartley and Associates, Family Law. I knew I shouldn't open mail addressed to both Jonas and me, but I couldn't help myself. Inside were legal documents that made my blood run cold: a petition for legal separation, a motion for temporary custody arrangements, and a detailed financial disclosure request. But the document that made me sink onto our kitchen stool was the paternity test results. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The scientific language was clinical and final. Jonas Vane was not the biological father of Miriam Vane. After 7 years of lies, the truth was there in black and white, signed by a certified laboratory technician. Attached to the paternity test was a handwritten note from Jonas. Eliora, I know you're reading this, even though it's addressed to both of us. We need to talk tonight after Miriam goes to bed. I've already spoken to my attorney. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we are going to do this. Jonas. I spent the day in a panic, calling in sick to work and pacing around our house like a caged animal. I tried calling Jonas multiple times, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting him, but my messages showed as delivered, but unread. By the time he came home that evening, I'd rehearsed a dozen different explanations and apologies. None of them seemed adequate. "Hi, Daddy." Miriam ran to hug him as he walked through the door. Jonas scooped her up and held her tight, and I could see the pain in his eyes as he looked at the child he'd raised as his own. "Hey, sweetheart, how was school?" "Good. We learned about DNA in science class. Mrs. Henderson said DNA is like a recipe that tells your body how to grow." The irony was devastating. Jonas met my eyes over Miriam's head, and I saw 7 years of love and trust crumbling into dust. "That's very interesting," he said quietly. "Why don't you go wash up for dinner?" After we put Miriam to bed, going through the motions of our normal bedtime routine while our marriage disintegrated around us, Jonas and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "So you read the documents," he said. "Jonas, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I've been trying to come up with an explanation for weeks, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion." "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think. You had an affair, you got pregnant, and you've been lying to me for 7 years about who Miriam's father is." The words hit me like physical blows. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that my private guilt never had. I never meant for this to happen. Which part? The affair, the pregnancy, or the lying? Any of it. It was a mistake, Jonas. A terrible mistake that spiraled out of control. A mistake? You didn't accidentally have sex with another man, Eliora. You didn't accidentally get pregnant, and you sure as hell didn't accidentally lie to me every single day for 7 years. I started crying then, not the manipulative tears I sometimes used to get my way, but genuine sobs of shame and regret. "I know how it looks, but I love you. I love our family. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did hurt me. You've been hurting me for years, and I was too trusting to see it." "What happens now?" I whispered. Jonas pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. "Now we deal with the consequences. I've filed for legal separation and I'm seeking primary custody of Miriam. You can't take her away from me. She's my daughter. She's the daughter you had with another man while you were married to me. The daughter you let me bond with, support and love while knowing I wasn't her biological father. Biology doesn't matter. You're her real father in every way that counts. Don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't you dare try to minimize what you've done by talking about what really matters. You stole 7 years of my life, Eliora. You let me believe I was building a family with you when you were building it with someone else. It wasn't like that. Lucas doesn't even know." "Lucas?" Jonas's face went white. "Lucas Reed? Your ex-boyfriend Lucas?" I realized too late that I'd given away more than I intended. "Jonas, please." "Jesus Christ, Eliora. Lucas Reed is Miriam's father." I couldn't speak, couldn't deny it, couldn't make this any worse than it already was. "How?" he asked quietly. "How did this happen?" "We ran into each other when I was going through a difficult time. You were working so much and I was feeling lonely and neglected. We started having coffee, just as friends, but then you decided to have an affair. It wasn't planned, it just happened. And the IVF, was that planned?" This was the moment I'd been dreading most. The affair was bad enough, but the calculated deception at the fertility clinic was unforgivable. I thought if we had a baby together, it would fix everything, make us a real family. We already were a real family, Eliora, or at least I thought we were. But the baby wouldn't have been yours, and I knew you'd leave me if you found out about the affair. So I thought if I could make it seem like the baby was from the IVF. Jonas stared at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "You switched the samples." It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry, Jonas. I'm so sorry. You're sorry. You committed fraud, Eliora. You deceived medical professionals, falsified documents, and stole my genetic material to cover up your affair. I know it was wrong. Wrong? It was criminal. Do you understand that? What you did at that clinic was a felony. I hadn't thought about the legal implications beyond the divorce. The idea that I could face criminal charges had never occurred to me. No one has to know about that part, I said desperately. We can just say the marriage didn't work out. People get divorced all the time. Jonas laughed, but there was no humor in it. No one has to know. Eliora, I've already given all the evidence to my attorney. The clinic records, the timeline of your affair, the DNA results, everything. What evidence? What timeline? Did you really think I wouldn't investigate once I suspected something? I have records of your meetings with Lucas, credit card receipts from your lunches together, phone records showing deleted text messages. I even have security camera footage from the fertility clinic showing you in areas where patients aren't supposed to be. The room was spinning. I'd thought I'd been so careful, so clever, but Jonas had been building a case against me for months. I've also been in touch with Dr. Harlow, he continued. She's very interested in reviewing the security footage and the sample handling procedures from that day. Apparently, what you did violates several federal laws regarding medical fraud. Jonas, please, think about Miriam. Think about what this will do to her. I am thinking about Miriam. I'm thinking about protecting her from a mother who's capable of this level of deception and manipulation. She needs her mother. She needs stability and honesty, two things you've proven you can't provide. The next morning, I woke up alone. Jonas had spent the night in the guest room, and he was gone before I got up. On the kitchen counter was another envelope, this one containing temporary custody arrangements that gave Jonas primary physical custody while the legal proceedings moved forward. I was allowed supervised visits with my own daughter. The woman who had thought she could control every aspect of her life through careful manipulation and strategic lies was learning that some consequences can't be managed or explained away. The blue eyes that had started this whole unraveling were about to cost me everything I'd ever cared about. The law offices of Hartley and Associates gleamed with cold efficiency on the top floor of a downtown high-rise. 3 weeks after the paternity test shattered everything, I sat alone in the conference room across from Jonas and his attorney, David Hartley. Hartley laid out the evidence without mercy: security footage of me tampering with samples at the fertility clinic, witness statements, chain of custody records, medical fraud, a felony, up to 5 years in prison. Jonas's eyes were stone. I'm thinking about Miriam, he said when I begged him to stop it, about the kind of mother who lies to her for 7 years. They offered a deal: sign a full confession, held in escrow, accept uncontested divorce, primary custody to Jonas, supervised visitation for me every other weekend. In return, no criminal charges, and a surprisingly fair financial split. I'd keep the house, half the assets. The alternative was prosecution, public trial, and likely losing Miriam entirely. I asked for time. They gave me 24 hours. That night, alone in the silent house, I read the confession they wanted, every calculated step of my deception spelled out in black and white. Then I signed it. I signed everything. The next morning, the divorce was final. Jonas kept his promises, no charges were filed, and he remained Miriam's father in every way that mattered. I became a supervised visitor in my daughter's life. Those blue eyes, so like Lucas's, a constant reminder of what my lies had cost. 6 months later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a photo of Jonas and Miriam at her school's father-daughter dance, both radiant. On the back, in his handwriting, "She deserves the truth." I stared at it for a long time. He was right, and for the first time, I didn't argue.